going to be looking at creating and navigating challenge, which is the first approach that you see on the evidence store on the EEF's website. So they have looked at the research, the educational research, and gleaned from that research what practices and approaches are really beneficial to helping our children in a specific area. And this area that we're looking at today is executive function and the self-regulation skills of our children, because they're absolutely interrelated. So we have wonderful guidance out there. We have our Birth to 5 Matters, and I find that it's especially useful for those of us who are working with the very youngest. We might have babies in our setting, we might be taking on 2-year-olds, and the information for that age group seems to be a little bit broader within birth to 5, and that's what some people have been feeding back. So they talk of self-regulation being very related to the relationships that we build with our children. It's a process that grows out of attuned relationships where the caregiver and the baby or child are closely attentive to each other and engage in sensitive, responsive exchanges. That we cannot build our children's self-reflection and also executive function without having those very close nurturing relationships. In Development Matters, they show us the very clear relationship between self-regulation and executive function. So those functions are holding information in mind, focusing attention, thinking flexibly, inhibiting impulsive behavior. So all of those are things that we need to be able to self-regulate. When we self-regulate, we're concentrating and thinking, concentrating that thinking, so showing an ability to sustain concentration, plan what we do next, monitor what they're doing and adapting, regulate strong feelings, being patient for what they want, it's a lot, and bouncing back when things are difficult. So developing that can-do attitude. And this is where we as practitioners need to be very careful to not present things that are way out of reach for our children, but that we're getting the challenge just right. So the children are invested in having a go with that minimal support from us to be able to achieve it. And that support might be through questioning that helps them with their thinking. It could be through a very delicate nudge or movement of a piece of jigsaw where the child hasn't quite understood the verbal instruction. But remember, we need to also give time for processing and wait as well. So if you want more information on the EEF evidence store, it shows you the 5 different approaches, and ideally you'd be using all 5 of these together to support children with their self-regulation. And why are we doing this? Because we know from the research that if executive function skills and self-regulation is there, the children are going to be able to succeed academically later in their school career. So the findings from the research were that creating challenge in your environment and creating challenge within your setting definitely has an impact on children's executive function. Activities work best when the educators gradually adjust difficulty based on the child's performance. So this links to that idea of planning for steps in skills, planning for steps in knowledge, building on prior knowledge, and if any of you have been to some previous training that I've done around curriculum, you will see the link there. That if we have in mind these steps to get to a certain point, then we are better able to scaffold the learning for the children who present differently at different stages. Playing challenging games was also seen to be really effective. They can be done in a small group. That's what they observed a lot in the research. And I will give you a few ideas in this webinar of how you might be able to do that. To scaffold learning, educators should provide support when introducing new challenges and when children struggle. So the group time idea is ideal for presenting children with new resources, new ideas, making sure that every child is aware how they can use a space or how they can use a resource and the type of language that they can use at that time of the year that's related to the things that you are presenting the children with, related to the experiences that you're offering the children. So if you scroll down to the bottom of the evidence store for creating a navigating challenge, you will find some video content, and I've found it really useful to use this video content, but because of technical glitches, I don't use them during the webinars because we have wasted quite a bit of time in the past doing that. So I suggest that if you want to know more, or if you want to see this in practice, do have a look at the video content on the EEF evidence store. Make sure you're looking for the early years evidence store, and you'll find it under the executive function and self-regulation skills section. So we know that a lot of our day as early years practitioners is dedicated to the continuous provision. Hopefully this is still the case in your reception classes. I know there will be less time to dedicate to the continuous provision because your group times will be getting a little bit longer by the time you're in reception. Nevertheless, it's really important that as practitioners, we are going round and having those quality interactions during the continuous provision time. So whether we are in a school-based nursery, whether we're a childminder, whether we're in a PVI, we will have moments in the day where children are accessing things that they have chosen to access, and we are that responsive educator scaffolding what it is that they've chosen to do. They may not need any support from an adult. It's really important that we're not interfering with their play, but where you can see a child is reaching a stage of frustration, or they're getting a little bored of using a resource in the same way, it's really important that we sense this and become a play partner at that crucial moment when a child is about to walk away, or perhaps engage in a less challenging situation. There are children who get into a cycle of doing things that are not cognitively challenging for them, and they might find this gets them riled up and gets them a little bit bored. In this situation, I really enjoyed observing over the week a practitioner working in the construction end of the nursery had set up different opportunities for the children to build with different materials. They had large foam blocks, they had some of the Outlast block planks, and we also have a lovely collection of these quite small blocks. And she showed the child over time how he could space out the blocks in order to make a construction that was higher and higher. And this was so exciting to the child that by the end he was doing this completely independently. Initially, it was modelled by the adult because she could see his curiosity and she could see that he was trying to make these towers that got taller and taller. But actually, she extended him to making them quite wide as well as tall. And it was just such a lovely thing to share. And she was making suggestions, she was reminding, sometimes using I wonder questions. I wonder how tall we can build this, which was spurring him on. She wasn't using closed questions to shut him down, but really encouraging that progression with the activity. And she also used modelling initially. So this is another example of what it might look like in the continuous provision, to be providing challenge. Just the simple addition of tools such as scissors can add that challenge, and you can see children are going to slow down. They know there's an element of danger. They're going to really show focus during such an activity. So initially there might be an adult who introduces this, checks that the children are safe with the use of the scissors. The person's probably only going to present them once they know that the children are fairly safe handling something so sharp. It may be that at one stage in the year, the children are able to do this independently. They know where to get the scissors, they can bring them to the activity and chop up their herbs into their soup. And the quote here is about the idea that if we want to know where our children are at with their executive function or their self-regulation skills, we really need to observe how they function with their peers independently. That gives us a really good marker of where they're at, so we know what it is that we want to help them with next. So here's another example of a child in the continuous provision who's having an exchange with an adult who wants to talk about his journey to school. So at this time of the year, there's a lot of language around journeys, lots of books that talk about journeys. It happens in the summer term for us because we're talking about transitions, and we find that that's a very nice link to the idea of journey. And the adult has described with pictures what it is that he has told her. And he was so inspired by this that he carried on the story and carried on using drawing for writing. So he was adding language to all of the bits that he was drawing. And you can see that this went on for quite some time. And he added so much mark making along with his language. So that was a nice little challenge that came about through an exchange with an adult. You might provide some open-ended loose parts for some of the younger children who find it much easier to manipulate such objects because they're not difficult to put together. And the challenge here was that the adult said, oh, I wonder if you might be able to make some faces with these resources. Let's see what you can come up with. And they'd also been talking about emotions and happiness. So that tied in very nicely because they were able to rehearse their language that they had newly introduced. In the environment still, if we're looking at the continuous provision, you might have several different levels of physical development to cater for. So how do you do that? How do you set up your resources in such a way that the children are adequately challenged, yet you are also allowing for those who are more hesitant to have a go and feel safe within the space? Here the adult is making sure that she's close by for the child who's feeling quite hesitant. So we've had a look at the continuous provision and the fact that we need to be prepared with our resources, maybe set up situations and equipment that is challenging for the children, but not too far out of reach. So how you set up over the year will look different depending on where the children are developmentally. And now we're going to look at the idea of those small groups that the research said was so effective, especially for those children who come from a socially, economically deprived background. I really don't like using that language, but this is the language that's used because let's not forget the remit of the Education Endowment Foundation is to look at the research to support the children who are at most need and help practitioners use those methods and those approaches so that children are not being left behind. And the idea of the little group really does ensure that all of your children are accessing the ideas, the language, and the resources that are available in your setting. So some children will be avoidant of adult exchanges. In the small group, even if they're not fully participating, they're hearing, they're listening to the language that you are suggesting. This is a mathematical group time where the children are using a collection of buttons and threading those onto their pipe cleaners. And they might be doing that in 1 minute with a 1 minute timer, or that we might have made it even more challenging and said, well, we're going to sing a song. And once we've finished the song, we need to stop threading. And that's obviously quite cognitively challenging for the children because they're singing whilst searching for the buttons they prefer. So how might that look for the 2-year-olds? Well, you might be looking at larger resources, things that are easier to handle, something that's really attractive. You can be using all of these methods with the older children as well, because we have children who won't want to come to a group time if they haven't got things to handle, if it hasn't come out of a box, if it doesn't look super exciting. So it is really important that we plan our resources carefully to make sure that we're engaging every single one of the children and not leaving anyone behind. And with the very youngest, this is another group time situation where in heuristic play, you've got plenty of resources, many of the same type. So there's no need to spend too much time over sharing or taking turns. You're actually focusing more on the language, on the exploration. And here you may simply have planned to ensure that you make sure you use the language of in and out. You might fill something and you might empty something. And if you have that planned ahead, that doesn't mean you won't be using incidental language that comes up when the child shows interest in the texture of something. Of course, you're going to build on that, but you're also going to reinforce the language that you've thought would be really, really helpful for the children to know at that point. You might do something like our 1 minute towers, similar to the button idea. You might use this timer and build your towers within that time. And this will then give you an opportunity to talk about comparison between the heights of the towers. It might give you a chance to talk about the time that's passed. And I really like doing these activities in a non-competitive way. So I really draw attention to the children that we're looking at the really interesting different shapes and patterns that the children have produced. It's a very inclusive group here. We have a pre-verbal child who's joined, and he is fully invested in wanting to be part of this group. And because it happens on a regular basis, it's something he recognises and wants to be part of. The research also pointed out that games were really effective in supporting children with their executive function and their self-regulation skills. So here you can see the very simple snail game where there aren't many spaces to go along. So it's really the first stage of a board game. But if you want to go further back and create an even simpler game, you might create a grid like the one that I showed you earlier with the 2-year-olds and use loose parts and present it as a game. It was a 3-in-row type game, but we actually just had a turn and filled the grid, and that was enough, and that was exciting. Never try to present a rule in a game that is out of reach for the age of the children playing that game. Take the lead from what they're thinking the game is and what they're finding exciting about it. So these sorts of games tend to reinforce subitizing, taking turns, counting, comparing, and don't be afraid to make up your own games, and you can co-create those with your children. So here is an example of a co-created game with slightly older children. They're 3 actually, these children, but they were really excited about using the Numicon. They used to walk around with them and sometimes use them as phones. So a resource that they're familiar with and happy to bring along. I just made sure that we only had one of each from 1 to 10. So it came out very easily that we wanted to put those in order. So the children put them in order from 1 to 10. Everybody had a turn. We discussed where things should go. So that involved quite a bit of positional language, which was really rich. And then the children had turns to roll the dice. And then they would pick up that many marbles. So lots of subitizing happening there. Some children were noticing how many from the arrangement of the dots. Some of them were needing to count them. So the learning was scaffolded for them quite easily because of having a really easy big dice on which to count or even place their marbles within their little dips. And then they would place them in the Numicon, and sometimes they would only place 2 in the Numicon that could hold 7, and there was discussion to be had there. They would talk about what they noticed, or they might be fixated on finding the 2 Numicon and filling it completely and making sure that they filled it. But then once that was filled, they had to think outside the box and they had to put them somewhere else. So really very rich discussions came out of this. I had planned for lots of mathematical language to be used, and we reinforced mathematical language that we've used previously. And because it's presented as a game, the children were really invested in participating in this. One other thing that came out of the research was actually that cognitively challenging physical activity can improve children's executive function. So it's not enough to provide equipment sometimes. We also need to present an idea such as, let's put our hands on the ground and move in different ways. Can you hold your weight by sticking one leg up in the air and holding that position? Yoga is a really nice way into presenting physical challenge to the children. If we're not super confident with our yoga, we can look at something like Cosmic Kids, where the yoga instructor is very playful, and we can learn a great deal from practitioners who have done this quite a lot themselves, and then take that into your outdoor environment once you feel confident in working in that way. So holding your body weight is definitely something that we should all be encouraging. It can be cognitively challenging if you're asking children to walk in different ways, on their hands, if you're doing the wheelbarrow and they have to work together with another person. It is also really useful for their early writing. So you want those hands to be getting strong, the whole arm and the shoulders. If there aren't opportunities to hang, to dangle, and to hold their body weight, they're probably going to have some difficulty in having control of their marks. And in this case, we see a baby who is being challenged physically by having a go at getting up on his knees, and he looks like he's really struggling. So it may be that he's done this a lot and he's at a tired point, or it may be that he's been propped up quite a lot and hasn't actually had that much time to naturally develop from the floor, from having had back time and tummy time. So this practitioner is supporting him in taking his first little steps in a crawl situation. So the key messages around creating challenge are that it's very useful for self-regulation and executive function development. We do need to have responsive. I put interested there because sometimes it is really hard to express to an adult that you really do need to show genuine interest to develop that quality interaction with the child. An interested, responsive adult ensures the challenge is just right. So just slightly out of reach, perhaps. There are those children that seek challenges all the time, and you can tell that they've been in an environment where they have that can-do attitude, where they've been encouraged to try new things. We really need to make sure that there's an equal footing there and that we are supporting those children who have less of a can-do attitude as well. Have we identified who those children are in our spaces, and what are the things that we are doing to provide that little bit of challenge so it's not off-putting for them? The message of group times being really effective, so that's something to think about, and that physically challenging activities are also really effective in supporting our children with their executive function. So these are things for you to think about. How can you ensure that you provide challenge that's appropriate to your children? What resources do you have available to ensure that you provide for the different stages of development? It may be that you have different types of scissors for when they're starting to snip, and then you might have double-handed scissors where you can do support, and then you may have a large scissor, and then it goes on to a smaller, more refined one. Also, with mark making tools, you can be very clear on what you present the children with earlier on. They're chunkier resources and they gradually become more refined and finer as they're able to grip them in a non-awkward way. And are there times in the day when a small group can take place? So those are a few things for you to think about.